Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And my co-host is, as pretty much as always the case, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth, Cardinals are 7-0 on the road, 10-2 on the season. If I recall, we both predicted a 10-win season. We just didn't predict that they would have 10 wins by week 13.
No, I think, I had them at 10, so I said, they could be 8-9. They could be up to 12-5, I guess the new rules are. But at the end of the day, that 12 now seems kind of understated, right? And that was if everything went right in my eyes. And to be fair, not a whole lot has gone right this year for the Cardinals. I mean, we know about Watt, we know about Kyler and Hopkins, but there's been other things, that have played out with Chase Edmonds, with Jordan Phillips early in the season, with Justin Pugh and Max Garcia struggling with injuries, and Rodney Hudson going down early in the season, and all of that, and to somehow still be 10-2 are, basically ready to kick down the door of what we thought they were going to do. It's fun to be able to watch and enjoy it. I guess that's probably the best way to put it.
It is. The Cardinals picked up a 33-22 win over the Chicago Bears over the weekend. Did so by picking off Andy Dalton 4 times. So this is, Andy Dalton, who has beaten the Cardinals exactly once in his career. It was in 2011, his rookie season, when he was at the Bengals. And truth be told, had Early Doucette not dropped a pass in the end zone, he would be 0-5 in his career against them at this point. But they improved to 10-2. They're 7-0 on the road, and that's what this show is going to focus on. Is they've got a really big game coming up in Week 14, Monday Night Football at home against the LA Rams. The whole nation will be watching, and in this show, we're going to react to the game that we saw against the Bears. And we'll kind of discuss what is it about the Cardinals that they're doing to be so good on the road where they've kind of struggled at home. We'll discuss the path to the NFC West crown, because they are at the gate. They're right there at the door knocking. There's an easy way to do it, and then there's some trickier ways to do it. We'll look ahead as to the Cardinals have a few players who could come back from injuries, who we think those guys will be, and then we will preview their Monday Night Football game against the Rams. Huge, huge game. But let's go ahead and get started. The Cardinals win 33-22 in Chicago. And we've seen it time and time again. The recipe for them to win games is to get stops and turnovers and get early points. And while it didn't feel complete in control, it felt like that there was a little bit of worry because of the running game of Chicago. But, you can't really start any better than an interception turned into a touchdown and then another interception turned into another touchdown. Panthers did that to the Cardinals, built a 17-0 lead off 2 turnovers in the first quarter of the Cardinals got 2 takeaways and 2 touchdowns just like that in Kyler Murray's return.
Yeah, and a lot of people look at what happened and they said, Kyler had 4 touchdowns, but he didn't do much. I was like, well, they only punted twice. like they didn't. I get that the offense wasn't on the field a whole lot, but it was it was short fields. I think they only had the one long drive, right?
Yeah.
It was short fields. They took care of business. They did what they had to do. And then you think about the other fact that you have to give the Bears credit. They went in and they were the first team we've seen where they didn't abandon the running game and the rush game plan. And I think in the end that's what helped make the game closer than it actually was from a statistical standpoint. I mean, I was pretty close on that. I think I had it 27-13, ended up 33-22. So a little closer than we expected, but the Cardinals got a touchdown late, and then the Bears got a touchdown and a 2-point conversion late. And so everybody, you know, laments that, oh, well, they did this, or, and it's like, well, sometimes those games just kind of happen, right? Like sometimes your offense doesn't need to do a whole lot because your defense did so much. And then, yeah, sometimes your defense, other teams are willing to sacrifice a game basically trying to stick with the game plan. And that's what Chicago did, right? Like every time, I mean, it seemed like every time they asked Dalton to throw, they were throwing interceptions. So,
I mean, for real.
And you do start to feel bad at times too. Like obviously not for like Dalton, but for Bears fans, like it sucks to see, a team that has invested a lot in a lot of different positions and players to see them struggle as much as they have consistently, and then they feel like they get their quarterback right and he gets hurt. But and I talked about this when I talked with the people over at Windy City Gridiron, the Chicago Bears SB Nation site, and I just said, I think Cardinals fans and obviously the Cardinals themselves give teams like the Bears and obviously what were the Cardinals, and you can even look at it a little bit and like maybe the Bengals, they give hope that it can be a quick turnaround with the right combination, right? Like it can be a quick turnaround with the right combination of coach and quarterback with that right combination. And it doesn't have to be this, entire massive turnover, but it can be something that turns around fairly quickly if you get that right combination. And it's just, you and I talked about it before. We didn't even know if they had the right combination because we weren't sure about Cliff, right? We felt, I would say 95% comfortable with Kyler. There was always that little bit that you're like, maybe, but for the most part, we were comfortable with Kyler, but we had a question on Cliff. And then it comes back, comes this week and you see the juxtaposition of where the Cardinals were, right? And where they are now, because you saw that Bears team where it's just like, ugh, like that's where it could be. Like, so it's fun to be able to sit back and watch and enjoy great football.
It is. And the fact that it was a lot of good things. It was kind of an ugly game to start in terms of weather. You could tell, and let's be honest, the type of offense that the Cardinals are reputed for having doesn't play well in wet conditions. Passing the ball when it's wet and cold and windy, it doesn't lend itself for a good passing game. And yet the Cardinals still managed to run the ball extremely well. 137 yards. It was the first game all season where it felt like Kyler was actively participating in the run game. He knew that the passing game was going to be limited. As when was the last time that we saw a Cardinals team attempt 15 passes in a game? That was only bested, by the Patriots on Monday night when they only let Mac Jones throw 3 times. But Kyler has only had one other game with fewer pass attempts, and that was last year's game against the Rams in Week 17 when he got hurt. He had, I think, 11 pass attempts in,
a quarter.
in about a quarter and a half worth of
Yeah.
play. And so, and he was 11 of 23. Obviously, they didn't do a whole lot with the passing game. And it was all the game plan. And what we're seeing from Cliff Kingsbury time and time again is that he's not married to one particular style. And I think that's where we've seen the greatest growth from him this year. A couple of things is, one, the ability to, and I think talent-wise has to do with it. So they've got game plans that they were able to stick to. Last year, there were games when we'll take that first Rams game, and everyone criticized him for the way DeAndre Hopkins was used, but they fell behind early, and then they were just going hurry up, and so they weren't running complex routes. They were just trying to get guys in space. The talents increased, so they were able to execute their game plan better. And for the most part, and I will say this, this is the first game I felt all season where at the end of the half that they did not handle things well. Almost every single night, we've got the Jacksonville game where the things fell apart because they have the touchdown, but if you watch how the Cardinals have managed the clock at the end of halves, almost every single game, they either move down the field quickly for a score, or they're able to eat clock and put themselves in a position for points at the end of the half, and then ideally getting the ball back. So that's been really good to see. But and while there are concerns on the rush defense, and maybe I think the reaction to that game was because it felt like that the team and the coaches were so much more enthusiastic and happy for the defensive performance than fans. Because the fans see, they gave up all these yards, especially on the ground, and were bailed out by turnovers. And the team's going, hey, we took the ball away 4 times. And from what we've seen consistently throughout this season, this isn't just luck. Their pass defense is such that it puts teams in a position to have turnovers. And so the Cardinals were way more excited about their defensive performance than the fans were, because the fans felt like, it was a bad defensive performance, but they got 4 turnovers and that's how they win it. Well, guess what, guys? When you take the ball away 4 times, that's good defense. And because if you look at, granted, we'll say some of those were dumb plays. I mean, but they were fortunate. But they're putting themselves in position to do it. So the first 2 interceptions were, first the players just didn't get their hands, or the one by Buddha. It's like, what happened with Komet? He's like, he had the ball and he just tossed it up in the air, basically. But, the Cardinals are making plays, and I will say that there are a couple of stats that were concerning, because they've been great on third down, they've been great in the red zone, and they've been great on goal to go. They weren't great, so they allowed 40% on third down. Not terrible, but not great. The Bears were 3 for 3 in the red zone and 2 for 2 in goal to go. That's the only thing that we're like, okay, they won by double digits, and there are still some concerns, a couple of concerns that they can clean up. That's great. It's always good for that to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you look at it, the only questions I had in the game, and they're not bad questions, is I was actually kind of surprised they allowed Kyler and DeAndre to play as much as they did. And you might say, well, DeAndre only played 39 snaps. Well, yeah, but again, they only ran 53. It's not like they were running.
He led the team, led the receivers in snaps. Now, Kyler, I understand. Kyler was going to play the whole game, unless there was a reason not to.
I was just a little surprised just because of the weather. Like, once they got up, I was surprised that they kept letting him go. And I guess that means he's healthy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the concern that we all are going to have to get over. Kind of like you talk about with the defense. Like, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? Because you go, well, why did you play him? You're risking injury. And it's like, well, he's probably 95%, if not 100%.
Which is better than pretty much anyone this time of year.
Right. And so it's like, so you just look at it and you go, oh, that's, I think it's the novelty of having somebody so great and knowing that if he gets hurt, the season's over, right? So you're like, well, but Hop, I was a little surprised with, especially because they weren't throwing him the ball a ton, and not that they weren't, wanting to, but it's just routes weren't coming open. the field was disgusting. Kyler obviously early had some struggles with the ball. All of that stuff. It was interesting just how much, like you said, he played at the most snaps of any wide receiver in a game where they were clearly just not going to throw the ball a ton.
And things, I think it's actually kind of telling is one of the things that Cliff said is about being smart with DeAndre is that, when he's on the field, defenses play them differently. So even if he's healthy enough to be out there and not hurt himself, even an 80% Hopkins, and that's when we look back at the Green Bay game. He wasn't 80%. He was probably 50-60% against the Packers, and still managed to have a few catches. Is his presence out there has to be accounted for, which opens things up elsewhere, and probably helped with the run game as well. What I was most encouraged about is because, obviously, with Kyler coming back with the injury, it was the first time that he was actively running a lot, which means, he hasn't been doing that all year, and the day that he does it is after he's coming back from his high ankle sprain. That means that ankle's in good shape, and you didn't, you never saw any ill effects of it. He moved around really well. It was great, and so I think maybe it was part purposeful, and it's simply just because of the weather. They knew that he was going to have to run more, but that gives me a lot of optimism for the rest of the season moving forward.
Well, I think, again, with how rainy and wet it was actually surprising that he ran so much. And I think it does speak to his health and the fact that he's not only healthy, but incredibly confident in that ankle and the leg overall and in his overall health. And so I think those things were encouraging for the game more than anything else, right? Not only were they completely efficient and effective offensively, but Kyler opened up something we haven't really seen a ton of this year because they haven't needed it. And I don't know necessarily if they needed it in this game, but he was able to do it without taking any shots. And that's the most impressive thing. I saw a stat, he carried the ball 10 times. He was sacked one time and he was never tackled. And that's one of those crazy stats where you look at it, and I think it's just hard to overstate how effective he is with protecting himself. And I know it frustrates people at times. And I know I've talked to people about this, and I just don't think people understand it. And we saw it in the preseason. When he runs out of bounds for a 2-yard loss and a sack, people get really, really irritated.
I get irrationally upset at it.
and the reality is it's twofold. The first is we love it when he runs all over the place and makes a positive play, right? And that can only happen if he's willing to do that. The second thing is, one of the things that gets quarterbacks hit a lot is those late throws as they're kind of heading towards the sideline and they decide late to throw the ball away. We've seen it with Josh Allen. We've seen it with Patrick Mahomes. Those guys will take some shots near the sideline because they're throwing the ball, and so a defender will just take that extra step. They'll take a 15-yard penalty to get a shot on a quarterback and make them uncomfortable. When Kyler steps out of bounds, he's usually doing it when there's nobody around him, right? Or they're 3 or 4 steps away. So it's not even a close call. And so it's, again, to protect himself. Now, is it frustrating? I get it. Absolutely. It can be.
Well, and there's another factor to it as well is I don't know how aware he is that if he throws a pass down the field and the offensive line thinks that he's running and they end up down the field, that can also lead to a penalty. But
yeah, so but that's the thing is he's acutely aware of himself, whether, like you said, the offensive line and that stuff, maybe he is, maybe he's not, who knows. But I truly do think he's acutely aware of himself, and he wants to make sure that he is safe and he protects himself. And that's with all of the hits these other quarterbacks take it's good to see him protect himself, especially because, I mean, people like to lament, like, oh, he's been injury prone. Well, he's had 3 injuries, and 2 of them were just playing quarterback injuries. Like, they were never from the fact that he was scrambling or anything like that. Like, the shoulder injury was on a sack. The ankle sprain was on a hit, right? Like, he got rolled up on the last play of the game. Like, it was actually more of a pocket passer injury than anything else. And so he's only missed the 3 games in his career. I know he's been injured in other portions of his career, but I think people overstate the injury concerns, and instead they should, but then they are the same ones that will get upset when he's protecting himself. And it's like, well, you really can't have your cake and eat it too here, right? Like, you either want him to protect himself because of the style of ball he plays, or you want him to be, a Cam Newton type. And this, I'm not, trying to take a shot at Cam Newton, but
he wore down quick,
right? That he might fly incredibly high. Who was the guy in the Greek mythology that flew too close to the sun?
Icarus.
Yeah, Icarus. They want, that was Cam Newton, right? This guy, for the first 5 years of his career, Super Bowl participant,
MVP.
league MVP, and then one of the worst quarterbacks in football. And that's the thing, is like, you just don't want these guys. You don't want your quarterback to be that way. Yeah, I mean, obviously we would take an MVP in a Super Bowl appearance, but if we can get that for over 15 years, like we talked about with the Drew Brees thing, I think that would be even better than just in 5 years.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing as well, something that stands out to me, James Conner, I think, has earned the complete trust of his head coach. And if what he's able doing right now is reminiscent of Kenyon Drake 2 years ago, and they just lean on him. And it's going to be interesting to see, because Chase Edmonds could come back this week. I don't know if he's going to come back this week or next week for the stretch run. Is how the plan. They love Chase, they love James Conner, but I think they've been pleasantly surprised at just how effective Conner has been, and how, for one reason or another, had doubts about him as an every down back, or maybe they just felt that having 2 guys that could be every down backs was better than having one and then question marks. But Conner is proving to be that guy, and I think he's going to find himself with a decent contract returning to the Cardinals after this season.
And it's one of those things too. I think Conner, everything you said is accurate and true, but I think the other thing with Conner has been that he is the perfect kind of end of game back, right? He's a guy that comes in and shuts down games. He's a guy that's able to come in when opponents are a little tired, and his physicality and change of pace really does change the whole identity of the offense and the game for the Cardinals. And so those are the reasons why I think he's so effective. I've actually been more surprised how effective he's been the last couple of games without Edmonds to kind of start the game and be the guy that starts things off quickly, and then he comes in and bangs later, because he's showing that he is still a complete back. I saw some numbers that I wanted to wait and ask you about. And so I've not heard, but what if they went 3 at 17.5? Would you take that, or is that too much?
Yeah, that's not bad.
And then the other number was 2 at 12.5.
Yeah, also solid. I mean, they were willing to pay Kenyon Drake, what was it?
I I think it was
$8+ million for 1 year. Knowing that they were going to probably let him go, and that was just after half a season. And so, I could, especially, it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do with Chase in that case, if they will try and bring back both, or if they'll let Chase go elsewhere, and if they like what they've seen so far from Benjamin to kind of ease into what Chase Edmonds has been. I don't know.
I think
that's more of an off-season talk of, obviously.
Right, but I think, just to finish your thought, I think ideally they would keep both. I think that's the way they go into the season or into the off-season is thinking, hey, if we can get, both guys back at X salary, that's what they're looking at. And then if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like you said, I think that's a conversation for another day. I would ask you this, though. Who would you prioritize?
Connor. I think you have to go with Connor at this point.
Is it just because his skill set's a little more difficult to find?
I think so. Because
a big kind of physical bruising back that can carry it late in the day.
Yes. I think that's it because, he's harder to find than someone who's built like Chase. Because more and more we're seeing the ability, you've got smaller running backs who are fast, who can do things in the pass game. And not to say that Chase he's the type of back that you can find someone on a lesser role, like an Benjamin, for example, who might not be as good as Chase, but if you've got Connor performing at his level, he makes a nice complement in the passing game and can do other things as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Coming next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk about. We'll look ahead at what they've got. Their problems at home compared to the road. We'll talk about the games, how they played at home, how they played on the road, and why they can't seem to manage to do them both. That's coming up next on Rise FC Red. We're back to talk about my bookie. And if for those of you watching on television, Tom Brady's talking about it, social media people are talking about it, cryptocurrency appears to be the future. So don't get left in the past. If you bet with my bookie, you can get into the game now with cryptocurrency. To get you kickstarted with crypto, use our promo code CRED to double your first crypto deposit at MyBookie. The best part is MyBookie accepts well-known cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum, so you can bet and withdraw with crypto. The NFL playoffs are around the corner, and this week the Bills and the Buccaneers face off in a potential Super Bowl preview. Both teams sit one win away from the top spot of their respective conference, but the high-stakes game, bet the Bucs money line. Don't miss out. Double your first deposit by $1,000 using promo code CRED. Head to MyBookie today, place your bets, and watch the sparks fly as well. Bet anything, bet anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals have an interesting batch this year. So coming up after last year, when you had the pandemic year where there were empty stadiums, it feels like the Cardinals kind of figured out playing on the road. Now this year, 7-0, they've scored 30 or more. They've scored at least 30 points in 6 of those 7 games. Should have had 30 against the Seahawks, but they missed kicks. They've won by double digits in every single one. They've only the Bears game was the most points that they allowed with 22, and that was a garbage time touchdown, basically at that point. And their struggles have been at home. They eked out the win against the Vikings. It was not a pretty game against the 49ers. They lost to the Panthers. They lost to the Packers and the Panthers. And so what we've seen from the Cardinals this year is, and they had, of course, the 31-5 win over Houston, but they even started slow there, where they got down 5-0. Can you put your finger on? Can you pinpoint what it is about being at home as opposed to being on the road, which has them being able to just dominate on the road and sort of struggle. I don't know if you can call it struggle. They're 3-2. Obviously, when you're comparing it to 7-0 on the road, I guess it's kind of struggling based on what we've seen because it's definitely been a harder time at home.
Yeah, it has, and I've been trying to kind of rack my brain. Why would they be struggling at home? There's a couple of thoughts I have. One is obviously, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way, it's not the best environment. One, it's a good field, right? Like they do a good job maintaining the turf. They do a good job maintaining the or the field, and they obviously are playing in a dome. I would say 90%, 95% of the time. They rarely open the roof, is what I'm trying to say. And so that makes it comfortable for the other team. And then there's the fact that every once in a while, and especially in those, Packers like environment games, it's more of a 50-50 type of game, wouldn't you say? So I think that's one. Two, I think they come in a little overly confident. The Packers game, they just didn't play well. I think in that game, they got a little ahead of themselves after the Hopkins face mask call that wiped that touchdown off the board. And then, Rondell struggled in that game. The Panthers game, obviously Colt was a bit of a factor, and you hate to, insult or pick out one player, but he struggled in that game, and he even admitted, I tried to be a quarterback, I'm not. But I think sometimes you come out with an idea of like, hey, this is going to happen. We're going to come out and, kind of work this team over, and then it doesn't happen early, and then you start to press, right? And so I think that's one of the main issues is that they're pressing, because the reality is this is a front running town. Let's call it what it is. You can, whether, and fans vote with their money. It's completely fine. I applaud the fact that for a decade, the Suns arena was empty on most nights, or was more, Cleveland fans or Miami fans or whoever, was coming into town. Lakers fans, obviously, during the Kobe era. You go to the Diamondbacks games, and it's actually an awkward experience because you're talking maybe 4,000, 5,000 people there in a place that holds almost 50. And so for the Cardinals, the reality starts to set in sometimes that, oh man, we're playing from behind. Oh, or we made a mistake, or, oh man, like the other crowd's really loud, right? Like, and all of a sudden it's starts to press. And I know these guys are professionals, and I know you like to expect them to not have that feeling, but they're also humans, and they're realistic of that idea. And this isn't to say it's the fans' fault at all. It's not, like, but I think that plays into it at times. You come out, you're overly confident, you're thinking, oh, we're just going to roll this, this bad Panthers team, especially after what they did to San Francisco the week before. I mean, that was just a statement game. And then they come in and think it's going to be an easy, and then they get behind, and then they press, and everybody presses, and everybody starts to try to do too much and try to be a player that they are not. And all of a sudden it snowballs into, well, this one's over, or there's nothing we can do, and the other team feeds off that as well. I mean, let's be honest. I know people tried to dispute the momentum ideal, but having played sports, and you having played earlier in your life, and then obviously you're at many, many more pro sporting events than I go to, you can tell when that momentum shifts from side to side. And what makes great teams great is the ability to overcome those momentum shifts or to steer into the skids, so to speak, and really come out the other side back with the momentum. I think all of that kind of combines into let's be honest, there's just 2 games, but they're only 3-2 at home versus 7-0 on the road. Like that really is a baffling sentence to state.
It is, especially something because the Cardinals traditionally have been a very good home team relative to their road play. And maybe it is the different mindset that you have to do to go on the road and be successful. But I can actually point to basically one statistic that kind of explains their struggles at home, and that's turning the ball over. You know how many turnovers that they've had on the road?
Not very many.
2. And they haven't turned the ball over. They had 1 turnover in Tennessee. They had 1 turnover in Jacksonville. They have not had a turnover on the road since week 3. And compare that to their games again, their turnovers that they've had. They had 2 against Minnesota, 1 that was returned for a touchdown. That was very, very, they were lucky that game. They turned the ball over twice in the first quarter against Carolina, which was basically what lost them the game. They had 3 turnovers against the Packers. Obviously, the last play of the game is what we remember, but the 2 other earlier turnovers were also critical. The Rondale Moore muff and then the Rondale Moore tipped pass that went for an interception that set up points. Basically has been the case. They have turned the ball over at home. They have not taken care of the ball nearly as well. They even turned the ball over once when they played the 49ers as well. And so they have simply turned the ball over more at home, which when you turn the ball over, it makes things difficult. It makes things difficult for you as a team, especially a Cardinals team that kind of their MO is to build a lead. They get them. Their recipe has been they love to start on defense, get a stop, get a score, get a turnover, boom, game's over pretty much. And that's how they're able to play from ahead. And they weren't able to do that against the Vikings. One, they fell behind on that first drive. They gave up a touchdown on the flea flicker. And then the 49ers, they never trailed. They had to battle back against the Texans. They were down 5-0. They scored 31 unanswered. But the Packers game was a struggle as well. I mean, they had to overcome the turnovers. They had to battle back. It's just they've had a much easier time on the road because they've taken better care of the football and have made things happen early. And I think that if there's anything we have to point to, it's that stat right there. And if you look at the home games that they've had, their win against the Vikings, they didn't take the ball away. Against the Green Bay Packers, they didn't take the ball away. They did take the ball away twice against the Panthers, but they were already down 17-0 in the first quarter. Basically, nobody in the NFL comes back from 17 points down that quickly. Because you have to basically throw your game plan in the trash. If you don't have a game plan, there's probably not going to be all that successful. So turnovers has been the story for the Cardinals this year. On the road, they take the ball away, and they take care of the football. At home, that's where their problems have been. Close games and the losses. It's come down to the fact that they gave possessions away.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing that you see a lot of for this club is that when they're able to play from the front and they're able to play from ahead, they're virtually unstoppable.
Practically, yes.
And that's the thing is, like, we haven't seen them play from behind with Kyler sans the Green Bay game. And that's why it would be interesting to me to see them come from, obviously you just want them to play from ahead, but we know that they're not going to win every game going away. It's a statistical improbability.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, how can they win from behind?
And they can.
I think the answer is yes, but I think you and I would both like to see it.
Yeah. Well, obviously what I don't want to see them do is have to come back from 2-3 scores down. That's not play. No, like what they did against the Packers, that was perfect because it was a close game. And the Minnesota game as well. They came back and they got ahead, and the same thing with the Packers game. And so we know that when it's a one-score game, they have the mindset that they can go down and score. It's just when you get 2 scores behind, and that's going to be pretty much any team. It's a long shot when you get 2+ scores behind. It's really hard to come back from early. And yeah, and the Cardinals just defensively aren't necessarily built that way, because we know their quote-unquote struggles in the run game. The best thing that the Cardinals can do to help their rush defense is not to fall behind, because but it's like the Cardinals. When the Cardinals get ahead, look at their running game. They run the ball half the time. The best thing you can do for your run game is to have a lead, because when you have a lead, you can run the ball.
Right, and it's easier, and it's it winds the clock down. And it takes the pressure off the quarterback and gives them a chance to be a little more successful in different things. So I think, for them, the key is going to continue to be to play from ahead. Like I said, I think the closest comparison from like a team standpoint I can remember are those, Peyton Manning Colts teams.
Yeah, those Colts teams were even, before last year, like Patrick Mahomes. Those Chiefs teams are built that way. Chiefs teams are built the way those Colts teams were.
And so we'll see, how that comes out, what happens next. But so far, you have to be excited for who they are and what they are and how they'll continue to develop, because I think right now the best thing you've seen is that this is a team, and we've talked about it, it seems like every week, but this is a team that can win in a number of different ways, and that makes them really tough to beat.
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, let's look at the path to the NFC West crown. Can they get a division title? They're on the doorstep. We're going to talk about how it's possible, what are the different scenarios, and there's one that makes things super easy. That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals are very, very close to winning the NFC West for the first time since 2015, sitting at 10-2, 2 games ahead of the LA Rams, whom they play this weekend. They have, as we stand right now, a magic number of 4. So they have a magic number of 4 with 5 games remaining to clinch the NFC West. There are many ways they can do that, but it gets tricky if they don't win this week. Obviously, the way number 1 to win the division, they don't clinch it this week, but if they beat the LA Rams, that magic number drops all the way down from 4 to 1, because of what that means. Magic number, if you talk about football, when you talk about baseball, things like that, it's an elimination number essentially, and it's the number of combined wins for your team and losses by the team that you are competing with. And so any combination of 4 Cardinals wins and Rams losses clinches that. But because of the NFL, you have so many different tiebreakers. There's also the Cardinals, if they beat the Rams this coming Monday, that would take 2 off of the magic number. But because it would give them a season sweep over the Rams, it also drops another number off the magic number and brings it down to 1. So obviously, and we talked about this on last week's show, the Cardinals could wrap up the division, and should, if they beat the Rams, they'll do it before Christmas, because then they'll have the 1-win Lions on the road next week. Yes, they did just pick up their 1 win, but actually I kind of like that now.
Oh yeah, I'm
glad they won a game, because now they're not as likely to that. They've tasted victory, but there's not that.
It's not a desperation thing.
You've got that. But so Cardinals beat the Rams. Their magic number drops to 1. They need 1 win the rest of the way, or a Rams lost the rest of the way to knock it down. Now, the problem is, if they don't beat the Rams are within 1 game, and that means with 4 games left, you've got 4 your magic number being 4. And things get complicated because then you've got different tiebreakers. This is how the playoffs work for the division. You look at head-to-head first, you look at division record, then you look at common opponents, and then you look at conference record. If the Rams were to catch the Cardinals, and the Cardinals right now, they're 4-0 against the NFC West. If they happened to lose both to the Rams and the Seahawks, and the Rams won their remaining, so they beat the Cardinals, Seahawks, and 49ers, all of whom they still have left on their schedule, they would have the same division record at 4-2. That would move them. You'd have to move to the common opponents. The Cardinals currently are 8-1, and the Rams 6-3. But you could also find a scenario where the Rams and Cardinals end up tied at 8-4 in those common opponents. If it goes to the conference record, if the Rams end up catching the Cardinals, the Rams will get that. But that said, here are the scenarios. Beat the Rams, that's the easy way. You just pick up one more win. If they beat the Seahawks in week 18, now we don't want to wait till then, that drops the magic number by 2 because then it would clinch the division tiebreaker in the case that the Cardinals and Rams ended up with the same record, because the Cardinals will have gone 5-1, and the best the Rams can do is 4-2. Each win obviously reduces the magic number by 1. If they beat 2 out of the 3 teams, so we'll just go with if they beat the Lions and the Colts, those 2, which are common opponents with the Rams, if they win both of those games, that reduces the magic number by 3, because they'll have then they would then have the common opponents tiebreaker. And then if the Rams lose to either the Seahawks or the 49ers thereafter, that also reduces the magic number by 2, because then they will have a third division loss. Essentially saying, let's make this easy. Beat the Rams, beat the Lions. You've got the division. I mean, if they beat the Rams this week as well, they also clinch a playoff spot.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about, because I think if they win this week, while it's not over, it's basically over, right? Like, they would have to lose. The Cardinals would have to lose out. And
the Rams would have to win out.
The Rams would have to win out. And then, you don't see that happening.
Well, no, it's like the Cardinals should beat the Lions, but there's nothing about what the Cardinals have done this season that says they're going to lose 4 in a row. Or as the case, they're not going to lose 4 in a row. They're not going to lose the Lions, the Colts, the Cowboys, and the Seahawks. And at the same time, the Rams have a very difficult schedule. So after the Cardinals, they host Seattle. And if we're going to base it on the Sunday 49ers, it might be that Russell Wilson has found, and we were talking about this before the show, that was supposed to be a 6 to 8 week injury, his finger injury, that he came back after 4. And so if you look at the first 3 games that he was back, he wasn't good. And so now in week 8, after 7 weeks off, and he's in week 8, he finally looks like a good quarterback again. So the Rams have the Seahawks, the Vikings. You never know what you're going to get with the Vikings. The Ravens and the 49ers left on their schedule. The 49ers right now are the number 7 seed. The Ravens are in the playoffs. The Vikings are right there. And the Seahawks are still a division game. So the likelihood that the Cardinals, if they beat the Rams this week, lose all 4 of their games, and the Rams win all that's virtually impossible.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing when you look at it. Like you said, you want to get to the point where it's virtually impossible, right?
Yeah, I mean, because we know that the Cardinals, and that's the thing. The Cardinals win the division. That's the thing. We obviously, your goals are make the postseason, win the division, get the number 1 seed, because they're in position to do that. Now, if we're looking at the number 1 seed, they've got 5 games left. They have a 1-game lead over the Packers, which means their magic number is 5. They need any number. They need any combination of Cardinals wins and Packers losses. I think of the last 5 games, since we talked about 4-2 should probably be the Cardinals over the one, so 3-2 the rest of the way. The Packers, the Packers also they don't have a hard schedule, but it's not easy. Their bookends. They've got 2 division games. They're playing the Bears this week. Then they go to Baltimore. Then they host the Browns. So we've got teams there to look at. You've got the Vikings at home, and then the Lions to end the season. Obviously, the Lions game is probably a guaranteed win. Aaron Rodgers will tell you he owns the Bears. But maybe they could get an upset. So it's very possible. I could see at least one loss, maybe 2, probably one loss based on the way the Packers are playing. We could count on a loss from them, which means the Cardinals would need to pick up 4 wins in their last 5 to keep them from catching them. So that's a little trickier because Green Bay is a very good team. But the Cardinals keep winning. It's no big deal.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing now is you're just in this win mode and don't worry about anything else.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like I like the atmosphere, especially since the Cardinals, outside of the Lions game, all of these games are significant in one way or another. The Rams are going to be in the playoffs. The Colts look like they're going to be in the playoffs. The Cowboys are, unless they fall apart, are going to be in the playoffs. They're going to win the NFC East. And the Seahawks game is a division game, so you can't let up on those games. So the only game on the schedule where it's not an urgent, like every game is urgent, but you don't go in with the matchup being urgent on a national level, is the Lions game, which you kind of like for the schedule to end the year.
Right, and that's the thing is, we talked about they had 3 games that basically you said they had to win, and then the final of those 3 games changes based on how you do in the 3 games that we call coin flips, basically, an average NFL Sunday game. So obviously the Rams is one of those games, and then you've got the Colts and the Cowboys. So if they obviously took care of business against the Bears, and then we expect them to take care of business against the Lions. So they still need to find 2 of those other wins against the coin flips. And so if they beat the Rams, basically what they do, and they take care of business against the Lions, notice the difference there, right? If they beat the Rams, and then it's if they take care of business, because they should beat the Lions. You never look ahead, you never overlook an opponent, but the reality is they should beat the Lions. And then you come into that final 3-game stretch with the Colts, the Cowboys, and the Seahawks. That will then be basically the expectation of you got to go 2-1. And so you look at each chunk as its own thing, and that's what this team has been really good about. And I know it's kind of cliche and easy to talk about, but you do see that mantra play out, 1-0 every week, right? Like that's the way they approach each week, and that's the way they have to continue to approach it, because while there are goals in sight, going 1-0 each week attains those goals. And the nice thing is, when you win, you control your own destiny. And what we mean by that is, obviously you already lost to the Packers. The Packers go 14-3. They're the number 1 seed, you'd have to think, because it's going to be really hard to expect the Cardinals to finish the season 6-0. It's just, that's a lot of winning, right? However, that's what great teams do. And if you think that this team is one of those teams that can be great or is great, and has the destiny of being great, that's the way you got to look at it. And so for the Cardinals, I think they're in now that 5-game stretch where they have 3 hard games and they have 2 games that they should take care of business with. They've got to find a way to go 4-1 now, right? Because we're still assuming that the Packers are going to lose a game. They may not lose a game. That might be wishful thinking from you and I, all the fans, whatever. But, if the Cardinals end up 15-2 in their inaugural 17-game season, it's pretty incredible that those 15 wins would be the best in franchise history, right away.
Yeah. Coming next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about, briefly, Cardinals not only have a big game against the Rams, they could get a few guys back. Who do we expect to be back in the lineup this weekend? That's coming next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals have a number of players. They got DeAndre Hopkins back. They got Kyler Murray back. That's huge. They have a few players who are still out, who could come back. These are the names to keep an eye on. Chase Edmonds, running back, who's got the ankle injury on injured reserve. Justin Pugh, who's not on injured reserve because he got a calf injury that's kept him out of the last couple of games. Rashard Lawrence, he's been a defensive lineman. He's been designated for return. He wasn't ready to come back this last weekend. We will see about this week. Aaron Brewer, long snapper, welcome him back after some of the problems that they've had with snapping over the last couple of weeks. He is also a potential returnee. Then you've got, but yeah, those are some key guys there. Those are starters. So you've got Rashard Lawrence is starter-ish, but he's a key contributor on the defensive line there at nose tackle. But you've got a starting left guard, you've got a starting running back, and you've got your starting long snapper. If you had to guess, and obviously this is just a guess, who and how many of those guys do you think will be in the lineup on Monday night?
When you look at it, I think Edmonds and Lawrence are back. After that, I don't know for sure. And I don't know how much Lawrence will be back in the sense that, or not Lawrence, Edmonds. I apologize about that. I don't know how much Edmonds will be back in the sense that he may be used sparingly. I mean, I know that Edmonds is better than Eno Benjamin, so I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but I think Eno only got, 5 snaps? 4 snaps?
4 snaps and touched the ball 3 times.
Yeah, and so I could see them effectively kind of using him in that Eno role first back if needed, like if they're just trying to get his legs back under him, and maybe double that, right? So 8 plays and 5 to 6 touches. So, yeah, I think those 2 are back, and that's how I would kind of look at it. I'm interested to see what the turnaround time is for a lot of these guys.
It sounds like they believe that Brewer will be back, and for me, I think that's big. He was on the field. He wasn't practicing. He can't practice. He's on injured reserve. So he was on the field doing some work off the side. Rashard Lawrence, I think, will be back, obviously, as a rotational guy. Pugh, I hope, will be back. That's especially with you got Aaron Donald coming to town.
It's just tough. Pugh's tough to read, man.
Right. And because even when he doesn't practice, there's always a chance that he's playing, too, as well.
Yeah, and so that's why Pugh's one of those guys I just don't guess on anymore.
I think he'll, considering the magnitude of this game, it has helped that John Harlow's been pretty fine. I mean, that's
right.
been the if there's one thing that we can really be happy about what the Cardinals have done this season is the fact that they have taken their lumps on the offensive line and really haven't dropped their level of play. So whether it's Kelvin Beachum being out, or Max Garcia out, or Rodney Hudson out, or Justin Pugh out, the play of the line really hasn't diminished.
No, it hasn't. That's what's been so impressive, is that they continue to find ways to create opportunities for whoever's back there. I mean, they did a nice job with Colt McCoy without Kyler Murray, and there was a different combination there. They did a nice job, obviously, in Murray's return, and they created a lot of running room and running lanes. Those are the things that they need in order to be successful, and to see them being able to do that with what they've been able to basically do without or dealing with injuries. Because that's the thing is like their top lineups haven't even been in there since what, week one, basically. And I would guess that they don't even really have, they never even had week one because I think you and I talked about it. They would have preferred to have Max Garcia in there. It's just Josh Jones was playing so well that they didn't really want to make a move.
Yeah, it was interesting how that's played out. I think, and I'm going to kind of just read into it. It's hard. Cliff is hard to read, but it sounds like, based on what he said last week, that I think Edmonds might be perhaps the least likely of those four guys to be back. I think Pugh will probably be in the lineup. I think Rashard Lawrence will be back. I think Aaron Brewer could be back. And I think the biggest question mark is Edmonds. But if you get all four of those guys, that's huge. Because I think that the Cardinals, at this point, they're a better team than the Rams right now, I think. And then you get them at full strength, and it really puts them in a good place. I'm not diminishing what the Rams have done this year, but they have been a highly inconsistent team, while the Cardinals have been the opposite of that. They've been very consistent.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that we've talked about. When you bring in so much talent, it becomes really difficult, right? And one of the things that I think the Cardinals were very careful of when they brought in their talent was to make sure that it was going to fit. You've got, the fiery kind of vocal and emotional leader of the defense in J.J. Watt. Like, that was a nice fit. You've got the stoic, quiet veteran leaders in Rodney Hudson and A.J. Green on offense, and that fit. And if you look at it, those players kind of also fit the personality of the other leaders on that team. Kyler Murray, he's not a vocal guy, so it would make sense that you would want to bring in guys like Hudson and Green that aren't going to be brash and aren't going to rub people the wrong way. And this isn't a shot because I love DeAndre, but Hopkins is that kind of vocal guy, right? He's kind of the diva, if you will, of the group. And I'm not saying he is a diva. I'm not saying he's selfish or anything like that, but he's the one with the loud personality more than anybody else. And so, they said, hey, we've got one of those guys. We don't need another one. I know they had some interest in Odell Beckham, and that's just doing due diligence, right? Like, if you're the Cardinals, you're always making sure of talent or other talent when it presents itself. And so I think that's been the big thing. The Rams, on the other hand, are an amalgamation of a lot of talent, but I'm not sure how well all the pieces fit together right now. Because it's okay if you have DeAndre Hopkins and he's wanting his touches and he's already in the room. It becomes a lot more difficult if you add DeAndre Hopkins to a room with a quiet DeAndre Hopkins, let's say. And I know Cooper Kupp's not as good as DeAndre Hopkins, but just play along from a statistical standpoint. And now you bring in DeAndre Hopkins who's wanting his touches, right? Like, that's always going to cause some issues. And so that's why it was interesting to me that the Rams did that. But we've talked about it. Like, they're all in, man. So they're going to throw everything at the wall because they don't have any help coming in anytime soon.
They do not. So, coming up next on the NFC Red Podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the Rams. We got the Cardinals and the Rams. Monday Night Football, Week 14. Let's preview, break it down, give our predictions. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red Podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Cardinals-Rams, round 2. The Cardinals got the first round, 37-20 in Week 4 on the road, where they really kind of dominated that game. The Rams threatened early, And that Byron Murphy interception kind of took it all the way because they got points after that, and the Cardinals were in control. They were controlled pretty much the rest of the game. Matthew Stafford did not look good. We've got a Rams team that is coming off of a 37-7 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. But let's not kid ourselves. Everyone's been beating the Jaguars and scoring 30 points on them. Before that, the Rams' defense has been the issue. Well, it's been twofold. Turnovers. They had a 3-game losing streak. They lost now all the teams: Tennessee, San Francisco, and Green Bay. They turned the ball over a combined 7 times in those games and allowed 28, 31, and 36 points. We know that their offensive talent is undeniable. Their offensive line is not as good as it's been in past years. They have the best defensive player in the league in Aaron Donald. They have arguably the best cornerback in Jalen Ramsey. There are holes on that defense, however. They do not have great linebacker play. There are questions in the secondary. They lost with Josh Johnson leaving and Troy Hill leaving as well last offseason. That leaves them in a weaker defense, especially and now that they're playing in a new scheme. And now, granted, they've had, the last 12 games, 13 weeks to get accustomed to that scheme. That said, they didn't do anything to stop the Cardinals in week 4, and their defense didn't look very good the 3 previous weeks before the Jaguars. And the Jaguars' offense is terrible, so you really can't judge anybody's defense on how they perform against the Jaguars.
No, you can't. I think that's a fair conversation to have and to be looking at. The thing is with the Rams, they've added, like we said, they've added all this talent, and they're a good team. Like, I don't want anybody to take that the wrong way. They're 5th in points per game, so 1 behind the Arizona Cardinals. So, I mean, they're scoring points. Obviously, they've had their starting quarterback all year, but and the Cardinals haven't. But that's not anything. I think what's been interesting to me is that they've got 3 games, 20 points or less. And when you look at the Cardinals this season, they've got 2 games, 20 points or less, and we'll say 21 points or less, and they're 1-2 in those games. So it's not shocking. And then the Rams in their 21 points or less games are 0-3. And so that's kind of the key for both teams, right? It's if you're putting up your average, you're a tough team to beat because they've held their opponents under 28 points in all but 4 of their games. So they're 8-4. So in 8 games, they've held their opponent to under 28 points. The 4 games they haven't, I'll just dare you to guess what their record is.
0-4.
Right. And so, you might say, well, duh, if they give up 28 points and don't score 28. But that's the thing is it's almost like that's the magic number. Whoever gets to 28 first against the Rams wins, right? Like, they're a team that if they get to their 28 points, they're really tough to beat. But if they're giving up 28 points and you look at it, there are 4 losses. You mentioned it, 37-20 to the Cardinals, 36-28 to the Packers. So obviously that was, where they gave up or where they scored 28 points and lost, 31-10 to the 49ers, and then 28-16 to the Titans. And those were also 4 games in a row. So when you look at all of that, when you kind of extrapolate it, this is a team that has the capability of scoring points. And it's unfortunate for the Cardinals that they got their get-right game right before the Cardinals. I mean, you got that Jaguars bye to kind of get you back into a rhythm on things. But that being said, I mean, this is a really tough stretch. They only have the 5 games left. 3 of them are on the road at Arizona, obviously next, then at Minnesota in week 16 and at Baltimore in week 17. Like, that's a really tough stretch of games, especially when you consider week 18. They play the 49ers, who they just seem to not be able to beat under Sean McVay. And so for those reasons, you say this team needs to find its identity. fairly quickly, and they need to figure out who they are. And you talked about it. Like when you look at a lot of their losses, those are the games that they're giving up big yardage. 465 to the Cardinals, 399 to the Packers. They struggle. They're not a good, or I shouldn't say that. They're not a dominant defense this year. They're a opportunistic defense. But they also are. They're also a front running defense, and we talked about that with the Cardinals, and even more so, I think the Rams defense is more of a front running defense than even the Cardinals defense is, because we see that they tend to struggle doing both, stopping the run and stopping the pass when they get behind. And for whatever reason, there's just not been a lot of consistency this year. All that being said, they have as much talent as any team in the NFL. So all it takes is for them to get right, and then they're right back where they want to be.
Absolutely, that they're offensively well, and there's a new wrinkle is the fact that against the Jaguars, but Sony Michel ran for 121 yards. Cooper Kupp is having a record-breaking season. Although I will say this, the Cardinals' pass defense makes Cooper Kupp a little less worrisome, considering how they did against him. And now you don't have Robert Woods to worry about. You've got Odell Beckham. But I'm still going to say this. Robert Woods at this point in his career is better than Odell Beckham for a number of reasons, because he's more versatile in that offense. And so I like the matchup. In fact, I kind of like how this looks this year. And I think it will come down to be something as simple as turnovers. If the Cardinals can take care of the football, we've seen that when they take care of the football, there isn't a team that has really been able to stop them. Especially if they're able to. And what we said about this team, this offense is impossible to stop when they stay on schedule. And that you can say that about most teams, but this offense in particular is deadly because they can beat you a lot of ways. It could be slow, long plays, long time of possession, or it could quick strike you down the field really quick. And so ultimately, it's going to come down to turnovers. Can Kyler Murray stay upright? Can he protect the football? And then they need to turn Matthew Stafford into Lions Matthew Stafford for 2 or 3 throws to make him make mistakes, because we've seen in multiple occasions this year, and he's not 100% healthy. He's dealing with some stuff, like everyone is at this time of year.
Well, and he's just looked lost at times, has he not?
Yeah, it's he'll get on a roll, but then if you make him lose his spot, if you hit him a couple of times, he does look mortal, because he can look pretty unbeatable, and the talent is there.
In that 3-game losing streak, he has 5 interceptions.
Yeah, and what did he have? 2?
He had 4 before that.
Right? Didn't he have like a pick 6 in 2 or 3 games in a row?
Yeah, I think in 3 straight games. And so you look at it, it's just it's one of those things. To your point, like sacks are a big deal for him. Interceptions are a big deal for him. In those 3 losses, he was sacked 9 times. He's been sacked 8 times the rest of the season.
Wow.
Like those are easily, kind of verifiable and attainable numbers for the Cardinals. And he's still having a good season. He's still, a good quarterback, but he's showing that volatility that he's kind of known for. And I think that's where they're at right now is, where are you catching him in that volatility?
And there's some good matchups you're going to want to see, obviously. You've got DeAndre Hopkins against Jalen Ramsey. You've got Marco Wilson against Odell Beckham, Byron Murphy and Cooper Kupp. Then you've got, of course, Chandler Jones and Andrew Whitworth on one side. The Cardinals are just in it's a premier matchup against two teams that can put up a lot of points, who also have very good defenses when they're playing at their highest level. This is the sort of thing, and I don't know if they expected this matchup to be this good, but this is one of the best Monday night matchups we've seen in a while.
Yeah, I don't think they expected it to be this good. I think that they fell, ass backwards into it, so to speak, and now they're just taking advantage of it, and that's that's what's crazy this season, is that they sent out, or they have the ability. They can flex Monday night games this year, right? Too, or is that starting next year? I can't remember, but
I don't remember.
But you look at it, and they really haven't flexed anybody yet. I think they flexed one game so far, and they flexed Denver, Kansas City into it, and that was a terrible decision. And so for the most part, I mean, they're leaving like Saints and Buccaneers in these games. And so for it to be a late season game, a week 14 game with two teams that are competing not just for the division, but for the NFC kind of supremacy, to see it play out that way is pretty impressive.
It is. And looking at this game, how do you think this one plays out? I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think this will be, in terms of, not necessarily of gameplay, but I think it will be one that comes down to the wire, kind of like the Packers game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a close game. I think the Cardinals are going to end up being able to hold off and win this game. But I think it's going to be one of those close games where you see both teams, have a chance towards the end. I think the Cardinals end up winning this one 34-28.
And I've got this game picked out at the Rams hitting 28 points, but the Cardinals get 31. Whether that is, it's actually kind of been this way. Cardinals have been so great excluding garbage time. It might end up being that they're up by 10 and the Rams score a touchdown with, like a minute left and have to onside it, but then the Cardinals take care of that. So I think we're at the point now where we can expect, we can viably predict the Cardinals to win out. And I think this is one of those games where they've done enough this year. We can say confidently, we don't have to, it's not just a long shot. Like before the season, we say, okay, we're just going to be reasonable and have them split their conference game, their division games. And now we're at the point now, and this when they played Tennessee on the road, I picked the Cardinals to lose because there was nothing, or looking at the division rankings, you were of course going to pick the Cardinals to go last. You weren't going to pick them to win the division because we hadn't seen it from them. We've seen it from them week after week after week after week. The Cardinals, I think if this game will tell us the type of team they are in terms of, are they a team of destiny, or are they going to have to find the hard way? If they feel like they're a team of destiny, they're going to take care of business. They're going to knock the Rams down and basically say, this is our division now. And then they will take care of whether they get the number one seed or not, that's a different story. But they will be able to lock up the division and strategically work for playoff season the rest of the way.
Yep, and I think that's what the goal is. Like we said, it's kind of cliche, but 1-0, right?
Yep. And then you can go 1-0 next week and take care of that. But that'll wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. It's episode 336. Our next show will come the night after, so it'll be a little bit closer. Normally have to wait a couple of nights or a couple of days till you get the reaction to the previous weekend's game. This time the Cardinals playing Monday night. We will record next Tuesday night and drop that episode on Wednesday. So on behalf of the Rise of Sea Red podcast, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.